Hugh and Kishi, he, him, class of 2024. And I studied abroad at Doshisha in the CGE program in the fall of 2022, I guess. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. I chose Doshisha because I chose to study abroad in Japan because I'm half Japanese and I really wanted to kind of connect more with that half and my ancestry in a way that I wasn't able to do before. And I chose Doshisha specifically because my family has connections to the Kansai, Kyoto, Osaka area, so I went there. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a great success for me. CGE program is really interesting because the classes are all taught in English, which is nice. But usually about one third to a half of the class is going to be Doshisha students from Japan, native Japanese speakers. And their English skills that really vary. So sometimes you'll get put in a group and it'll be, someone who like lived half their life in Switzerland and they're fluent in 20 languages, and some people who kind of wouldn't even be able to like you can't really hold a conversation with them. And I think it's actually really interesting because it kind of forces you to evaluate your own world in a way you have to like see everything through a non-American perspective, which is huge. But also it gives you a chance to meet a lot of Doshisha students. Some of the other programs you're not in class with somebody, or you're in class with these students. You get to work on them with projects, meet them outside of class, and it's a great way to make Japanese friends if that's your goal. And they all love practicing their English, and they love helping you practice your Japanese. Most of the classes, most of them are about like Japanese culture or society, like sociology classes, modern political issues classes. I love the one called Transmitting Culture, which is kind of about how Japan, everyone in the world always like loves Japan and like why, how did that happen? And you kind of like learn how it's intentional. The government wants you to do that. And yeah, I really like it. The only thing I would say is that if you want to if you're really there to learn the language, your options to take language classes are very limited. You can only take up to 3 credits worth, which is very few. 3 out of your 16 can be language, so it's not the best if you're trying to really learn the language.
My name is Kendall Levine. I'm class of 24E. She, her pronouns. I am a political science and Asian languages and civilizations double major, and my focus within Asian Lang and Civ is Japanese. So the reason why I decided to study abroad in Japan was to gain fluency in the language. And I did the CJLC track, which is the Center for Japanese Learning
Language and
and
culture.
Language. Yeah, Center for Japanese Language and Culture. I should know this. Which, unlike CGE, which you did, all of my classes were in Japanese. So I didn't have the flexibility to choose or shop courses like we usually do at Amherst. I took a placement test and then my schedule was basically handed to me. I think CGLC is a really good track for people trying to gain fluency in the language, but it is a lot of in-class hours. For example, I was in class from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. on Mondays. But it was completely in Japanese. So I really do think I have gained conversational fluency. And in the Japanese classes, they have local student volunteers. So it's also very accessible to make friends with Japanese students. Oftentimes we would grab lunch after, and then once you kind of broke the ice after the first couple of weeks, you can start meeting outside of school in class too. So that was really fun.
What are some of the ways that like studying at Doshisha might be different from Amherst that like students who are going on exchange might need or want to know in advance? And that can be, just the layout of campus or, class norms and structures, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So for exchange programs at Doshisha, I think they're always centered around the main campus called Imadegawa campus. And that campus, it's not that big actually. So in that way, it's very similar to Amherst. Everything is walkable. The one big difference is that dorm housing is not on campus. So your dorm can be mine and Hughes were very close to campus, so like a 15-minute walk. But there were some dorms up to I think a 45-minute tube ride away. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Classroom wise, I think part of our experience was still due to COVID. So everyone had to wear masks. And I think some of the activities that would have been available for students just weren't happening just because of COVID, and Japan still takes COVID much more seriously than we do in the US. I think that's what comes to mind first. Hugh, did you notice anything?
One thing just to add on to what he said, that there's two campuses. There's Imarigawa campus and Kyotanabe campus. Kyotanabe sounds like Kyoto, but it's not. And do not pick that program. You'll be kind of put in the middle of like nowhere, and you will be very far away from chances are what you want to do when you come to Japan, which is be in the city and all the cultural sites inside the city, not so much out in the countryside. I know a lot of people who didn't know that and they chose the wrong location and were a little upset about that. I was saying if you're in the CGE classes, because it's they're all like liberal arts style classes. It's very easy to be like, oh, I'm in Amherst, but it's a little different in that they're easier, which is very nice. And sometimes you have to like remind yourself that you're not there. Chances are you're not there to like really study these like some of these topics. You're here for the language, you're there to study, but if you're not there for the language, some of these classes, like you don't want to get caught up doing all the work. You should be, like you should be there to have fun. Like you don't need to do all the work to pass and get a good grade. So yeah, I don't know if that's the best advice to tell, but
We'll
that's
take
very
it. Yeah.
I think one more logistical thing that Hugh reminded me of when you mentioned the second campus. So usually we are centered around Imadagawa campus and there is no gym. So to some that might be a very surprising thing. I know I was surprised. I just ended up not working out at all. But Japan is very like walkable, so I wouldn't worry too much. But that is one difference I would say as
And
well.
the gyms are expensive if you want to. There's some like walkable from the dorms, but they're up to like $70-$80 a month. So if you're there for fitness, you're on a sports team or something, and you want to go to the gym, it's a great thing to know beforehand.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you made friends, either you were on an exchange program also or local, and how you kind of got involved with campus?
Yeah, so a lot of my friends came from my dorm. I was really fortunate to be put in the Kamogawa dorm, which had a giant kitchen. So we all kind of like would meet for dinners by accident. We'd all be eating at the same time and make a lot of friends that way. And then in class, you just have to not be afraid to approach the Japanese students because, as I said earlier, like they love practicing their English. Like that's why they're there in that class. And they're all very friendly and it's easy to go up to people and talk to them. And sometimes it can be a little awkward to like take that next step of like meeting outside of class and making friends, but you can like start with lunch and kind of go from there. And then speaking of lunch, the best way to like really meet people is they host these like lunch circles on Monday and Friday. And one's held in English, one's held in Japanese, and it's for international students to meet each other and also for international students to meet with some of the local students, which I went a couple of times, not as often as I should have, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think my experience was a little opposite to Hugh's. The dorm I was placed in was pretty empty, and the location of our kitchen was not very like there was no real common area for the girls to meet. So I actually ended up having not very few, but my closer friends ended up being some Japanese students that I met during my time there. But I think some of that has to do with also our difference in program. Because there are a decent amount of international students that aren't there to study Japanese at all. So there is a good English community and also a good like Japanese community. Yeah, I think I also used the language circles, the lunch talks. I also only went a couple times, but one of my best friends that I made, I met there. And he's a local Japanese student. And so he's actually thinking of coming to Amherst for the other way exchange once he's a little older. Yeah, so that's cool.
That's awesome. Great. And if you had to give like, we'll say one piece of advice for a student who's considering the exchange, what advice would you give them from anything from like the application process or for kind of on-site things? Like, what do you think that they should know ahead of time? Or keep in mind, maybe?
One, Imagawa, not Kyotanabe. I can't stress that one enough. That is a huge part for the application.
The thing that jumps forward to me the most is it is a very unstructured program, which is not a bad thing, but be prepared to be on your own. It's a very, very good experience, and I think had all of us grow in like a way that's definitely uh harder to learn when you're on Amherst campus because we get a lot of support here. Um, but with the Doshisha program, they help enroll you in classes. They tell you about certain events, but then other than that, you're on your own. So you're gonna have to do some planning, organizing, and not be afraid to like kind of go out there and initiate things with people. Um,
Um, like there is a dining hall, but it's not like Amherst where you can kind of go whenever and eat. Like, if you're, a lot of the time you'll be eating on your own, cooking on your own, however you end up getting your meals, but not so much dining hall meals all the time, which is both good and bad. But definitely good to know, which is why they give you a stipend for the money or for the food. Um, yeah, I think a good thing to know, which is like it seems obvious, but it often doesn't hit you till you're there, is like it's a very different culture. Like I mean, yeah, everyone. That's why you go abroad is to like see a new country, but it's not a Western culture at all. It's very different. And that's just something you have to know. Like one is like mildly stereotypical, but also very true. Like rule following is like a thing that people will stare at you if you don't break the law. If you break like rules, like and they often like don't take it well. They won't say anything, but it's good to know that like, you should follow the rules while there. And just that there will be a lot of things that you're used to that are not applicable there, like tipping, for example. You don't do that. It's like ways that how you order at restaurants and how you go grocery shopping are all like a little different. And it's good to prepare yourself before you go into it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Great point.
I think kind of off of that note, I definitely did not prepare enough cash before I went. So like physical Japanese yen. Because parts of Japan are still very cash based, even with COVID, even with Japan and like technology. If you're in like the city area, card is okay, but cash is the safest bet because cash is accepted basically everywhere, whereas card is only probably like a third of the places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and both of you kind of touched on something that it's reminding me of my experience, and a question I want to ask you is, do you have any like memories or stories of maybe things that were potentially like stressful or embarrassing in the moment, but like looking back might be like funny or like not seem as big as they were in terms of like cultural mistakes or faux pas? Like I definitely caused a minor scene in a convenience store doing the self-checkout wrong. And running around the train station trying to find somewhere to take out money because my card wasn't working. Which was stressful in the moment, but now I realize that's just a mistake that I will prepare for next time. So I don't know if either of you have stories like that you might want to share so that people can learn from our mistakes.
I remember one. Kendall was there for this one. Like one of our first nights there, we got a couple friends and we go to this like dinner place, and we get there and immediately we realize we can't read the menu, and we don't know how to order the food. So we're sitting there for like 10 minutes, like trying to like read the menu, get everything. Then we finally understand what we want, and then like we didn't realize that you had to call the waiter over, so we're just sitting there for even more, and then we're like shy because we're used to people coming up and like asking us, like none of us are asking anything, and then finally like our Korean friend who was there, who's actually quite fluent in Japanese, he's like, okay, I'll just do it, and he's ordered everything for us, and me, Kendall, and another American are just sitting there like we had no idea what we were doing in the restaurant, and we didn't even think about it until we got in the restaurant, like, oh, like you need to learn stuff, you need to learn how to do it. A little scary at first.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, I think I've actually experienced some of the opposite effect. Now I'm very used to just like raising my hand in a restaurant here and coming back to the US. It's like actually it was surprisingly not difficult, but I guess surprisingly difficult adjusting back to US customs. Um, but yeah, I don't think I've had like I guess like it's not really a huge story, but Japanese has like a lot of honorific levels.
Mm.
And I always thought it's best to just use the formal one. Um, but after meeting some Japanese friends, like after like a couple weeks of knowing each other, they finally told me like it's really, really weird
Mm.
how formal I was. Where, they were a year younger than me, and I kept using like more formal language just to because we didn't really know each other yet. Um,
What was your favorite part about being in Japan in general? It can be in Kyoto or it can be in other places that you've traveled. What's something that like you'll always remember about studying abroad in Japan?
I loved the international community. I still think about it every day. Like I would just walk down to that kitchen and you'd hear French, German, Swedish. We had like an Irish guy, kid from Thailand, and so there's Korean being spoken, and there's something about that that's just so cool and amazing. I think it's great when you study at Amherst. The whole point of liberal arts is to really like learn how to see the world in a different perspective than the one you grew up with and what you're used to. And so when you like we just be talking at dinner about like global conflicts, and all of a sudden I'm hearing brand new takes that I just never even thought of. And I really loved that, and just it's how everyone like kind of mixes and matches together, and you just learn to make it work. And now I'm back home, and everyone's all American. I'm like kind of boring. I don't I kind of sound a little pretentious saying that, but like yeah, yeah, I really love that community though. It was really nice.
I would have to say the food, but
Mm.
not just as in like the delicious food that was easy on the wallet, but also just the fact that food was such a way for me to connect to people. Like usually first times meeting someone was over lunch. Um, and then if lunch went well, then we got dinner. And then if dinner went well, we would make it a routine dinner. Um, and then Japan has a surprisingly diverse uh amount of restaurants. Like um there's a lot of Indian food, a lot of Italian food, French food. It's actually really interesting to see what Japan thinks is more like gourmet versus what we think is more gourmet. Um, but yeah, I think I definitely used food as a way to like connect with people. I guess another thing to consider is that the dorms are usually like separated by gender, very strictly so. So if you have people of the opposite gender or people that are divided by that dorm difference, you kind of have to find places to spend time together outside of your room. And I know at Amherst we like hang out in our rooms a lot. So that is another difference, I guess, to keep.
Note that it's not like super serious, but it's
Mm.
good to note that just like, it is still a very conservative country and also very
Mm.
a homogenous country. At least among the younger generations, I never had saw any issues with anyone. So yeah, like LGBTQ, for example, like like the young people are very like advocating for it being fine, but for them, like it's still there's still like a marriage ban on same-sex couples or anything like that.
Mm.
And also for those, if you're not Asian or white, you might face not like issues in public, but people will stare.
Mm.
And they might look very uncomfortable around you. And so if it's just good to know before you, because a bit of a culture shock, like I'm walking around and just people are staring at me, which also might be my size because most people are very small. People are always like staring at me, but you get on the train and people like stay away, or you're walking down the street and they'll like purposely walk around you because they don't want to be like near you. So yeah, it's just a little like you get used to it kind of quickly, but
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I think it's just a huge culture difference too, and that staring isn't really considered rude.
Mm.
Um, I think I think there's definitely people who are thinking weird things and trying to be rude, but it is so common. Like even me who can get away with uh like because I am East Asian. And actually like my friends had said that they thought I was Japanese. But like I don't know, like the way I dress, like the people I was with sometimes, um yeah, people would definitely stare. Sometimes they'd ask questions and they're not malicious, but they are pretty blunt
Mm.
sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
good to keep in mind. Yeah. And it's like you mentioned, it's not necessarily like a bad intent, but it's just curiosity, and that doesn't, minimize whatever impact or feelings that might bring up for you, but just kind of keeping the context in mind. It's not an excuse, but it's an explanation.
Yeah.